If you've clicked on this video, chances are you have failed. You, at one point or another, said, I want to learn a language, and for one reason or another, didn't end up doing that. But learning a language is about more than fluency, and I want to provide a little bit of peace of mind in the fact that even though you may feel a million miles from your goal, when it comes to learning a language, you become a more well-rounded person as soon as you start. Learning a language can potentially teach you this huge, big picture thing that I never would have expected, that I think is so beautiful, and I'll talk about that at the end of the video. But beforehand, there are a bunch of cool little things in between that I noticed very early on. When I started learning words, baseline, A1, A0 even, I would force myself to recognize these words out in the wild. I learned the word tree in German, and a few times a day I would look at a tree. I would force myself to look at a tree and say, Baum, 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 der Baum, tree in German. Suddenly my day, which was usually treeless, is now full of trees. When the itty-bitty baby version of you learns a language, this is essentially what you do. I know this because I've been spending a lot of time with my friend's baby recently. She's the cutest thing in the entire world. She will, as soon as she learns a word, that's all she wants to say. She does the same thing with people's names, where she doesn't want to play. She doesn't want you to she wants you to give her attention, but she doesn't want you to come near her. She'll say your name over and over again, and then you'll turn around, you'll say hi. You'll be like, you do want to play? And she'll be like, no. And you'll turn around and she'll start saying your name again. But you point to a word and say, apple. And as soon as she understands, she can point to a word and point to an apple and say, apple. Then that's all she wants to do, and it's the cutest thing in the world. But like I said, this is what you do when you're a tiny little baby and you're learning a tiny little language. But as it becomes second nature, as your words become more natural, as you start to form your full sentences, and you know all the words you need to do that, nothing becomes magical or new anymore. Starting that process over again brings a fun newness to the world and to things you ordinarily wouldn't notice. This is to say, language learning took me out of autopilot and forced me to see the world again. Now this might be a good time to mention, I am easily impressed and I search for extravagance in the mundane. So, you might be looking at the examples that I give today and think, what's her problem? She's such a weirdo. And to that I say, you're mean. But to that I also say, just open up your mind for the next few minutes. It may or may not change your life. Now that is one thing I learned about myself when it came to learning a language. One advantage I began to see almost immediately in my interactions is I immediately became more interesting to people. Now, full disclosure, and maybe some of you out there can relate, I'm usually deemed interesting by people who have very little experience in the hobby I happen to have a lot of experience in. However, when you've been doing something for almost a decade, or more than a decade in my case, getting recognition and attention for only that one thing can make you feel boring and one note. Once you add language learning to your list of hobbies, you immediately have a new conversation starter. Depending on the language, people might want to know why you picked it up. If the person you're speaking to knows that language, they may want to test your knowledge on it and put you on the spot, which I hate because I hate being put on the spot. But either way, I stopped feeling boring the first time I told someone I was learning a language. Suddenly I could walk into a room and not be that girl who does that one thing. And that was so relieving and fun for me. And in that same vein, not only did I become more interesting to people, but I also became more interested in people. I think I mentioned this in my Why You Should Learn a Language Right Now video. When you learn a language, you learn a culture with it. And I would say on a more personal level, I think I found myself more deeply aware of the way that I communicate with people in my native language after I started learning a foreign language. To further explain, another thing I mentioned in that video was how I don't realize how American I am until I talk to my friends who aren't American. It's the same concept. You move somewhere else and then you return to your hometown. Everything is the same, but it looks different because the lens you're using to look through is brand new. When you begin another language, you have the opportunity to return to your own very, very differently. This leads into the next thing, which I never would have expected to come out of learning a language when I started. Now, I'm a person who needs to form the right words. I loved writing growing up. I'm a composer. I've been writing songs from childhood up until right now. So I like to formulate the perfect way to convey an idea. I've always been that way. That's good a lot of the time, but it also takes the fluidity out of life when you're always so afraid to be wrong. And not just being wrong, but afraid to not be perfectly right. Learning a language taught me how to stop fearing saying the wrong thing. to not be afraid of failure and even learn to love failure for the experiences that it brings. Through the process of being forced to speak even though you're not fully sure what you're saying, and to read even though you're not really sure what you're comprehending, I was taught it's okay to learn things in real time. If you're anything like me, you do a lot of self-editing in your head, and a lot of those thoughts never see the light of day, and a lot of that time, that is 100% a good thing. 100%. But other times, you just have to let go and let your mouth speak. Even though language learning is in some ways a constant uphill battle, it's also a constant source of joy and wonder because of how much you're learning, because of how many trees you stop and say "they're bound for," because of how many curse words you accidentally say and learn how to apologize very fast for, because of how many people you learn how to more deeply connect to. Picking up a language or two has taught me that the act of using words with a purpose is well, good, and beautiful. And the attributes I've developed have been in my pathway since day one. I mentioned earlier a few things from my video why you should learn a language right now. If you need a sign that this is your time to start your language learning journey, this is that sign. And if you click the video on your screen, you will hear a lot more about it. I really enjoyed this conversation we've been having. I love it so much. I hope to see you again soon. Until then, adios and auf Wiedersehen.